Welcome everyone. This is the biggest part of my job here, is to get out of the way as quickly and as smoothly as possible. So let's get stuck in. I'm so excited today to be joined by Karin and Lisa, the co-authors of the book Mooseheads on the Table, which is such a catchy name. This book focuses less on the structures and processes of self-managing organizations and more on the mindset and the human skills needed for them to thrive. Both work with tough leadership training, which has been supporting teams and organizations to work without managers or with a more adult-to-adult leadership style for 20 years. In this session, they're excited to have a dialogue about why many organizations and communities, especially those looking for new ways of working, fall into the trap of false harmony or avoiding conflict. And how can we train ourselves to embrace conflict, because there's so much gold on the other side of it. Personally, I know for me, conflict is both, like a treasured gift and validator of mine, and also like a mortal enemy and a source of great fear. So I am, really, really curious and keen to dive in. And I'll hand it over to you, Karin and Lisa. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, so I just want to kind of kick us off and kind of state the purpose of our session and what we were kind of hoping for this session. And I've joined some of the sessions this morning, Karin and I, and already there's been some themes coming up around, how do you deal with tensions in a team or a network or an organization? The importance of trust, the idea of jumping paradigms, which I really liked. And Karin and I were talking yesterday and reflecting on how we think that, I think the audience of this event, I think many of you are working in really purpose-driven, impact-driven initiatives. And I think many of you are obviously exploring and interested in new, more human ways of being and working together. And I think a pitfall that many of us fall into when we do that is, as Mel said, kind of falling into this false harmony trap. So I think there's a potential for all of us to really jump paradigms in terms of how we relate to conflict. And I might throw it over, well, actually, before I say that, just to say something logistics-wise, our plan is to have a bit of a dialogue, Karin and I, so we've got a couple of kind of primer topics to kind of bounce around together, but feel free to put questions and comments and stuff in the chat that we can kind of weave in. And then we want to do a bit of a breakout session moment as well, so that you get a chance to talk to each other and kind of digest and surface questions. And then the rest of it will be more of a Q&A vibe. So it's quite a loose structure. So feel free to engage in the chat, and looking forward to your questions. But I thought I'd throw it over to you, Karin, to talk about this idea of how you see conflict and the way we relate to conflict, and the opportunity there.
Yes, I also started out being really afraid of conflicts, both my own or others. I was terrified and ran away from them. So this ability to be with conflict and use them in a productive way, you can learn that. I'm a living proof of it, having worked with conflicts now for I think more than 25 years at least. And it started for me when I was young and worked with unemployed people, because Sweden were thrown into a big recession in the 90s. And I was sort of ending up or sent out in groups with unemployed people that I was supposed to support, to have jobs. And I didn't have so many clues on how to do that, honestly. What I met was people in groups with a lot of resignation, a lot of resistance, and a lot of complaints about sending young me to them. So I really understood that nothing here would be done that is good in this sort of working climate, in this atmosphere in the group. So I started to to experiment with the question, is it possible to change the atmosphere in a group somehow? And I started by just intuitively naming and inviting people to share their considerations. And I could hear, you're blonde, you're young, you do nothing, you know, all sorts of ugly things came up. And I learned to listen so that people felt heard, which is key in coming through in conflicts. If people get really heard, that's magic. So I got better and better on this. And in that process also, I found this tool, Mooseheads, which was, of course, not my tool. It was elephant in the room that I had heard in English context or literature and such. But we in Sweden didn't import that saying by then, 20 plus years ago. So in my so I transformed it to Mooseheads, more Swedish version of it. And the metaphor is exactly the same as the elephant in the room. Something is lying there on the table, a moosehead that is rotten and smells, and nobody says anything about its existence. We just pretend it's not there, and we continue to talk about the budget. So that's the story of the mooseheads. And later I sort of made a method to take teams that were ended up in some dysfunctional or conflict state, and help them to shift their working climate or their culture, one can say, in a very short time. And since then, we and my colleagues and I have been doing that in many, I think more than 500 teams or so over the years.
Yeah,
So
I'm just wondering.
Yeah,
I'm just I'm a bit of a visual person, so I was just thinking that I had a slide for this that I showed the other day, just to give a bit of context about what we mean when we talk about climate. And this was really something that I learned when I met Karin for the first time, like 7 years ago, and since then in working with Tough. It's another iceberg diagram, of course, but this terrain under the surface of, you know, what everyone's feeling, how people are being, you know, individuals' way of being and collectively our way of being, and collective mindsets also in groups, like how do we relate to things? You know, does the group relate to our task as being impossible? You know, do people relate to, how do people relate to the climate? You know, do we see it as something that's fixed, something that we can't change, or something that we have, you know, control or influence over? And then, like, you know, interpersonal dynamics, and here's where mooseheads are too, these kind of taboo issues, kind of long-standing often cases that we don't talk about. And for me, it's been so interesting over the years practicing this and helping groups to do this. I mean, we practice this in Tough, and helping groups to do it, just to start by just talking about it. Even that is kind of radical, I think, to stop talking about the surface issues in the words and you know, budgets and projects and whatever, and sort of interrupt and name what's going on under the surface, which is not obviously like a precise science, but it's kind of like trying to put words to something intangible. So it's been, for me, really interesting to learn the power that brings.
Yeah, and later when I moved on to work with self-organizing teams, it was very clear that if you don't have a psychological safe trust, you know, a culture based on trust, it won't work. So to me, it's really crucial to start with the culture when you want to be self-organized. otherwise it won't work in my experience. And also this paradoxical thing is that most people see conflicts as they're not welcome. They shouldn't be there. They have to be fixed. And everyone that we talk to in workplaces, we asked, how is your relationship to conflict, or what do you think about conflict? Yeah, of course, you should try to avoid them. It's like engraved in us. Instead of that, so many wise researchers proven over and over again, like Wilschutz and Susan Wheeland and many others, that the conflict is the access to psychological safety. There is no other entrance than to ride the storm in the conflict.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, I keep coming back to this article by a guy called Shane Snow that someone else shared with me, and he talks about how psychological safety does not mean psychological comfort. And I think that's been something I've been mulling on a lot lately, like this tendency, I think, those of us who are exploring these things have still to kind of see harmony as like that should be the kind of norm. And if we have conflicts, something's gone wrong and we need to tend to it and then go back to this kind of state of harmony. And like Karin and I have been kicking around this sort of provocative idea of like, is there a way to accelerate the point at which, and obviously you need trust here and some skilled facilitation type people, I guess, but to accelerate the point at which conflicts emerge, or where we kind of really embrace and lean into differences, where we dare to, name things, even if we think they're small or irrelevant, to kind of, get to that point more quickly, because we have a tendency, I think, especially in these groups, to be, because we care a lot about the purpose and each other, we can have a tendency, I think, to be a bit polite, a bit cautious, and sometimes become like overly caring. I think that's also us not relating to the potential sometimes of the group, that we can be really scared of hurting each other. So that's an interesting idea to me as well. It's like, could we do that responsibly, accelerate the point at which we get to those conflicts?
Yeah. There is a question here about what do you find under the surface from your show. Joshua, hi Joshua, nice to see you again, met many years ago. So there are some themes, actually. There's like incidents in the past that is not sort of processed at all. And it could be anything from somebody decided that the free breakfast was not free anymore, and that people make that mean that they were not important. So that's a small moosehead, but with a big impact on motivation. And it could be, mergers and moving offices, or any kind of changes that were mishandled. So it's not the actual move or the actual incident, never that is the problem. It's how it was conducted or how it was implemented. And that is, it could be dragged on for decades, those historical mooseheads. And then another one is unhelpful dynamics between fractions or constellations within the group or with other groups, like we, them, like a very common theme. We are good and they have bad intentions, or millions of themes. And sometimes it's the people that worked in a place for a long time that are the bad guys, and the new one are the heroes, and sometimes it's the complete opposite. But it's like a we them dynamic that is very, very common. And the third, if they have a team leader or a manager, that's of course mistrust to leadership as a very, very common theme. So they're quite recognizable and common. So how do we do this, Lisa? How do we continue about?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe this is a good moment to break out into breakout rooms, and maybe the prompt is, you know, what questions are coming up for you? You know, what's your relationship to conflict? So if we have breakout rooms for, let's say, like 6-7 minutes, something like that, Mel is going to help with breakout rooms, I think. Thank you. And yeah, talk to each other. You know, what's coming up for you so far? What's your relationship to conflict? What questions are you sitting with? And then we'll come back and gather and kind of steer the dialogue from there. Seeing lots of like thinking faces. So we were talking in the main room here about, I think it would be valuable for Karin to say something about, and I know there was a question in the chat there about how do you deal with conflict constructively? So Karin's going to say something about the process that she and we in TUF have developed over the years, the kind of Moosehead process. And feel free to put in the chat any questions that came out of your conversation just now that emerged, or reflections also welcome in the chat. And then we'll see where we get to from there. So over to you, Karin.
Yeah, so I just wanted to sort of give away the whole approach, how we help teams in conflict or in an unhelpful working climate, one can call it, to move forward. And the first thing, if is your role, if you are an external person, like a consultant, a coach, or you have to get the mandate first, and that's quite not so common. So you have to have the mandate from the team, all the people that are in the team. So for instance, when we help more traditional organizations, HR call us or the CEO call us and say, this team needs help, come and rescue them. And when we meet the team, they see another consultant coming into the room and think, okay, this dawned on us, when is it going to stop? You know, we haven't asked for a consultant or a coach or something. So the first thing we learned is to ask for the mandate from the team to support them in changing their culture. And that needs 3 things really: that they acknowledge that they have a problem, or like they have a conflict, or an unhelpful atmosphere or climate. And then they get trust in you, that you know what you're doing. And I usually just describe the process and what we do very shortly, and then they ask questions, which could be like, what if nobody says anything, or what if somebody breaks down, have a breakdown or something. And we just sort that out and then ask if they have trust in us helping them. And the crucial thing is here, the third thing is that they can choose to give us the mandate or not. And that I also learned very early, that people that have a real choice, that creates a lot of responsibility with them, and because they choose this activity. So it's really important that they feel free. And if it's relevant for a group, it's very common that they say yes. So we don't start until we have the mandate, and then we ask the current status. I'm sure you have done this a million times in teams because that's quite common. The thing here is to do the current status in relationship to the working climate or to the atmosphere or culture only. So people will say, oh, we are financially stressed, which is fine, but then it's some sorting to be done to sort the surface issues from the actual labeling what's in the air, sort of. So what you want to define is how is the working climate. So it's scary, it's like unsafe, it's cautious, it's hostile, it's confusing, it's lonely to be in it. Yeah, words like that. And if we have big teams, we do this on Post-its. If it's a small team, we just collect labels and sort of find clusters in that, and people align on maybe 3 words or so that sort of states or describes what they're in, what their current status according to climate is. And what does sometimes also give is a relief that's but at last we can talk about it, especially in silent atmospheres, of course. Oh, it's not just me that notices this. I'm not alone. So this thing in itself creates relief. And then we ask, how do you want it to be? And this is universal globally, you know, everyone wants trust, to be respected, to have straightforward communication, to have like joy of work, and everyone on the planet wants the same thing in workplaces. So that doesn't take long. And then the question comes up, so how could you change from your current status to the status that everyone longs for in this team? And this makes people, and this is the crucial thing in this approach, that you don't help people here. You don't tell them what to do. You don't give advice on, oh, you should do this and this to fix your conflict. You just relate to those people as capable of solving their own issues. And you also make a contract with them that they produce the climate. So in teams with bad climate or dysfunctional climate or culture, people don't see themselves as producers of the climate. So they just suffer from it as victims, almost. But people can really relate to, especially if there are 5 people in the team, that we are producing the air here, we together, we 5, and all we have our own part of this, which means that we alter our part and do something differently. All of us, we can create what we want very quickly. So I call this going from being a consumer of a working climate or culture to become a producer of the working climate that you want to have in the team. And of course, that's a theoretical, easy to understand, but then you have to speak about the moose heads. So you say this metaphor that I said to you before, and then you ask, what is the biggest moose head here? And then people start to say that. And here again, it's important to sort out the surface issues, so it's not end up in arguing like, yeah, we should have it like this, no, we should do it this way, like surface issues, because that's not the thing here. We should just focus on our working climate in this session. So we talk about, oh, I don't have trust in the team leader, and I don't have trust because this and this and this. And you facilitate the dialogue with the team as a coaching dialogue that makes it move forward. So what do you need to yeah, it could be like somebody thinks somebody else has bad intentions or the wrong intentions. And then you ask questions, so what intentions do you have? Oh, I have this intention, which is always a good intention, by the way. And then you ask the team, okay, so this person that you think has a bad intention says that he or she or the person has a good intention. Can you believe in that? Can you trust that? So this is the way you facilitate moose heads. And after a while, the climate changes, and people also get more skilled in resolving misunderstandings and ask control questions like, did you really mean that with what you said now? That felt really X, Y, and Z, this thing. Is that what your intention was? So they start to communicate on a higher level. And then you make contract with, communication rules, basically. With if I get some irritation, if I get irritated with somebody else in the team, I have the obligation to solve that with that person. That's a very common rule. So this is it in a nutshell. And the key here is that you don't get provoked, afraid yourself, or too scared. At least it's scary. Sometimes it's really scary, but that you not lose your way of relating to them as capable in the process. That's the key. So that's really it. How you do it, and it takes. I mean, in a small team, it can take 2 sessions or even 1. In bigger crowds, maybe like 4 sessions at the most. And it's sustainable because people learn in the process. It's not you that does it to them. They do the job and they develop the skills needed in the process so they can do it themselves.
I've been kind of curating some questions while you've been talking, and there've been a couple of themes around how do you name things or call out things without being negative or complaining or and Joshua just asked also, like, does it need to be someone external running the process, or is it possible to have someone self-medicate with the Moosehead approach? So for people who I guess who are wanting to facilitate such a process with their team, what do you recommend in terms of how they're being when they're calling out things or naming things?
In this crowd, I think anyone can do this actually, because you have so much skills that is handy in this. So then it's just to go ahead. We work with people and teams and traditional managers a lot in other, traditional organizations. And it's very rare that somebody has this this ability to relate to teams as they are the agents, because they're so ingrained in coming in with answers and fixing and installing the solution. So that's in the way. But if you are a coach and familiar with empowering people and supporting people, this is just something to try out. Nothing can go wrong, because it's not like doing something perfectly. It's like moving things forward. And how you name it, this is also, so you have to be respectful, of course, and you make contract of having a respectful tone of voice in attitudes. And if somebody is not, you stop them and ask them kindly to now please say that in a respectful tone of voice, because this sounded a bit this and this. So you make sure that it is respectful in the room, and put stop to stuff that's not. But then you have to be really straightforward with things and name things, because otherwise it becomes cosmetical and too nice. So you help people to really be honest about what they think and really be as resigned as they are. Like if there is a lead in this team of any sort, you know, and the trust is down, then you have to name that and ask, so how much trust on a scale from 1 to 10 do you have for your team lead? And some people think that's appalling. You can't do that. It's like, yeah, this and that. But you create a context which is not coming from right and wrong. It's not nobody's fault, this. It's not creating scapegoats. The manager is not a bad person. So it's also in a context of non-judgmental atmosphere. So therefore, you can be straight with what you're thinking, because nothing else would transform anything.
Yeah, I think this is really the key learning edge for a lot of us in these spaces, because I think, you know, obviously things like nonviolent communication and any kind of trauma-informed facilitation, all of these skills help and are complementary to this kind of process. And I think that sometimes we can go too far in needing to sort of take care of and protect members of the group. And I think something that for me has been really transformational is developing my muscle of being really straightforward and frank, which doesn't mean, you know, it doesn't equal harsh or rude. And for me also, I think a key distinction is, you know, that what you're naming, it's not about kind of bad or wrong. It's about what's workable. So if I'm coming from a purpose of, you know, wanting to improve our working climate as a group, you know, then I can describe what I experience. Like, to me, the climate feels like really tentative and cautious, and I feel like I can't say anything, and I really think that's in the way for us. You know, and if you have agreements and contracting at the beginning and stuff, I think this is really for many of us our challenge, actually, to develop that muscle. There's a great kind of 4-box model also that Amy Edmondson has in terms of psychological safety, that if it's too much psychological safety and no like accountability or, you know, or frankness, then it's this comfort zone. And then that's when we become really, we're sort of tiptoeing around things, and we're so careful about what words we use, and you know, that ultimately just breeds entropy and resentment, and that's not a good place either. So I think this has been for me often like working with groups similar to people in this audience, is like helping people to give themselves and each other the permission to be more frank, more blunt, and knowing that you can, you know, if you have enough trust in the group, that you can clean it up. You know, if you have an ouch moment, or you know, like Karin said, you can ask questions like, you know, now when you said that, my interpretation is this, is that what you meant? And then you can clean it up together, you know. So I think that's a really interesting dimension of this kind of methodology.
Yeah, and also, yeah. So I agree, and it's very common in self-organized that they end up in being really, really nice to each other, like love bombing and so on. And what I said in the beginning, it's like the conflict is the entrance to what we really want, this psychological safety with trust, and very few people have ever experienced that, so they don't know where they're sort of heading, and shouldn't recognize or being able to describe that atmosphere before they experience it. And sometimes conflicts can be so painful and ugly. Those researchers write about that they are, for people, almost unacceptable, sort of. because it's so scary when people are angry or if they are sad, or because we're not used to be with people that are that upset. And I can really understand that. So you have to, be there for people, because they can't imagine that this could become some good out of it when they're in the middle of it.
Yeah, and I think, I saw a comment in the chat about the metaphor of the moose head. And for me, I think there are elements of this process, and I know that there are other similar processes that have these principles, but I think because of all the reasons that our brains are designed to kind of avoid conflict, or, we overreact to threats, and it kind of, takes over our bodies, and our prefrontal cortex shuts down and all of that stuff. I think the containers for these kinds of conversations are super helpful. So for me, the moose head thing helps because it's sort of, it dissociates a little bit the issue, and the image of this kind of bloody, rotting moose head on a table for me is almost comical also. I think in Norway they have an equivalent, which is the stinky fish. And I know some people also use the elephants thing, but it's sort of, it gives us a language and a kind of permission to talk about things that otherwise might feel very hot and raw and kind of difficult to talk about. And all of the pieces in the process, getting the mandates and people really choosing or not choosing to be kind of co-creators of it, and agreements, and, all of these pieces, and listening, and also for me, like, when we facilitate these in person, it's really helpful to draw things up on flip charts, or if you're doing it on Zoom, you can have Miro board and you try and map out and name things, so in the book, for example, we write about a moose head that one group had, that was the secret troika, where they felt like there were three people in the team who were making decisions behind closed doors, and were sort of having these sideline conversations, and so giving that moose head a name helped kind of create a shared language of it. So this is a thing, this is like something we're all relating to as true, and then we can challenge it. Is it true or not? And what do we want to do about that? And what agreements do we want to have about that if down the line I wonder if that's happening again? So kind of this thing of labeling things and putting language to things, I think also really helps take things out of the domain of that we're not talking about it and it's sort of fluffy, to getting a shared picture. There's something very powerful of having like a wall of Post-it notes with adjectives describing the current status of the climate and clustering them. And like, wow, there's a lot of people who say, like cautious, or a lot of people who say, this, and at the same time, this. And then it's like, we all have a shared picture now of something that was, previously in the domain of the invisible. So I think all of those things enable us to be a bit braver. Like there's this researcher, Michael Wiley, who talks about safe spaces and interaction scripts as two kind of principles that help lower the barrier to taking interpersonal risks. So I think if you have all of those things in place, it enables you to be brave and do it anyway. And like in tough, it's never easy for us to bring up moose heads. Yeah. Even though we've practiced it for years and years, and we start most of our meetings by saying any moose heads, still it takes courage, and you have to step over, that whole body feeling of like, woo, can I really bring this up? And what's going to happen when I say this? But we have this shared commitment to that. When we do that, it contributes, it kind of advances us towards, continues to sustain this kind of climate that we want together of openness and trust. And we appreciate each other when we do that, however, tense it becomes or scary, because we know like that's helping us. We're all co-producing this climate that we want. So I just wanted to share some thoughts about the kind of container aspect of it.
Do you allow more time than for moose head around at the end of the meeting? That's a good one. No, we have another tool for that, right, Lisa? After the meeting, that's the sieve.
Yes, yeah. So we tend to start, like, for example, we have development days once a month, where we meet for half a day on Zoom and we train and practice things together. And we kind of check in, and then we start with any moose heads. So we start with moose heads, actually. And if you get practiced at it, hope the idea is they're not usually not huge things. And then at the end of a session or a meeting, we ask, is there anything left in the colander or the sieve? Anything stuck with anyone, big or small? I just want to check back in about that kind of hairy moment when I interrupted you. Is it okay between us? And we also have this thing where we talk about pebbles. So we're kind of talking about group level, but also in TUF, we regularly have what we call a relationship conversation. So if I have a pebble with someone else, like having a pebble in my shoe, then it's really good if I take the initiative to bring that up with them. So, I have colleagues reaching out to me, and I reach out to colleagues from time to time saying, hey, I have a bit of a pebble with you. Is it okay if we jump on a quick call? And then we have a call and we say, yeah, it's just this small thing on Slack about, this newsletter project we were working on. And I kind of interpreted your message as being a bit like harsh or something. And I just wanted to check, if that's me, or like, what's that about? So I have those now. I think I have at least one relationship conversation a week, I think, or at least one every 2 weeks anyway. And at the beginning, I felt like I had failed if I had a pebble with someone and, that was me being intolerant or something. And now I'm kind of finding it really fun, actually, to use this pebble thing as a way to strengthen all of my relationships. And I had a relationship conversation with a colleague a couple of weeks ago where I changed my mind about a project that I wanted to work on with her. And I communicated this to her, and I didn't do it in a good way. And so then we had a relationship conversation to clean it up. And it was like the best conversation she and I have ever had. And previously to that point, we'd been really harmonious. We worked together really well. We were quite similar. And we were both just amazed at how actually this kind of first fight that we'd had, this first conflict, like really deepened our relationship. And we learned a lot about, our own pitfalls and, personal development journeys as well. So that's my kind of fun thing now, is actually to almost like to seek out pebbles as an opportunity to strengthen relationships around me.
Yeah. And you're touching on something really also important, to normalize conflicts, to accept them, and they're there. And when people collaborate, it's always friction all the time. It can't be any other way. And a good thing is to start to use handy tools to communicate at a higher level, really, because that's what's needed. And don't be afraid that you will be thrown out. So that's exactly what psychological safety is about. I'm here. If I'm accepted and loved, if I don't hear anything, things are working with me. I can trust that if it's something that doesn't work with me, people will say that.
Yeah. And of course we give each other feedback too. So it's this paradox of that you can. So one of our values that we've come back to a lot about, that, this paradox of we love and accept, the sort of 5-year-old version of you that shows up sometimes with all of its needs and fears and messiness. And at the same time, we relate to that you have a potential, and that you have, blind spots or things outside of your awareness that we can lovingly give you feedback on or challenge you on, and because we want you to thrive and grow. And so it's also this paradox of like, unconditional love and acceptance, and at the same time kind of striving to challenge each other, to really contribute to each other.
Somebody called that ruthless compassion.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it's a good description.
I'm thinking because there's so many great kind of questions and thoughts and stuff popping in the chat. Should we do another breakout room round? And just to give you a chance to sense make together and share, what are you thinking now, and what questions are coming up for you now, and what is this, how is this all landing with you? What is there anything that you've heard here today that you might try or experiment with in your own domain? So if we have breakouts again, Mel, for same time again, and then maybe hear some sound bites when you come back.
Yep, all good.
Great, thank you.
No worries.
Okay, welcome back. I'd love to hear some voices. So if you have a reflection or a question that you'd like to share from your breakout room, if you can raise your hand, and maybe we can have a bit of a Zoom queue of hearing some voices. Mitro, is that you? It's the clapping emoji. Is that? Do you have some? Yeah, go ahead. I mixed those up too.
So I raised the two hands. The conclusion that we have is this fun thing that not to be afraid of the conflict, and to have fun. And I have a question, whether you have, and you know, these fun tools or games in order to experiment, to practice, and to have fun, but not with the real in time of the real conflict, but in imagination conflict, playing roles, etc. Thank you.
I'm sure there's a bunch, like anyone who has, I'm sure there's a bunch in here that people know of, so feel free to put this in the chat. A couple of things that come to mind. One is that in one of our tough courses, for example, we create a situation where a group has to reach a concordant decision. In other words, like a kind of wholehearted consensus, and they have to decide, which neighbors they want in their group of apartments. So they're like a housing association, I can't remember what you call those. And you have a list of candidates, and they're designed to be provocative, and then you have to choose, which two do you want? And it's funny, like however many times I've watched groups go through it, it's really hard for people to get to some kind of concordance at the end, and people try all kinds of like techniques of like above the surface and ways to do that. But really the way to do it is to you can only do it really by being really open and curious about other people's needs and preferences and considerations, and really open with yours. So anyone that tries to do like clever voting systems or like, it doesn't really work. But what works is like asking people, so what for you is important about choosing that person and not this person? Or what would you need in order to feel okay with, choosing this person or so on? So that's like a simulation of something that's not like a hot, real conflict that you can practice. It's to get awareness of what are my tendencies in such a situation. Do I kind of check out when it gets difficult? Do I dominate? Do I try and use a process to sort of, put a lid on things? And secondly, to kind of practice the skills that are helpful to develop, to have these kinds of conversations. And I can't remember what the second thing I was going to say was. No, it's gone from my head completely. But I think, that's right. There was a book. I've been reading this book, 15 Steps of Conscious Leadership. 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, it's called. And And one of the authors, I think her name's Diana Chapman, was on a podcast, and she was saying that an exercise she does with groups sometimes is she asks people like around the table to each share an assumption that I have. Like an assumption that I have is that, you know, time isn't as important to Mel because she always arrives, you know, a bit late to meetings or something. And, you know, each person shares something. And it's just, she says, it's just really fascinating to see all of the assumptions that we make. Some of them, you know, oftentimes amusing to others, like, wow, that's really, you know, your interpretation of that. Anything you'd add, Karin, about ways to practice or games?
No, not really. I think those are good.
Any other like reflections or questions that came up from your breakout conversations?
We've got Suzanne.
Yeah. Suzanne.
Yeah, I was, our group, we were really appreciating the small, simple approach and the iterative approach of pebbles, because I sense that mooseheads say, okay, it's a really big thing, and now it's really hard and it's really scary, and maybe that's not the place to start. Maybe the place to start is with my relationship with that person. And maybe it's a bunch of little things that have gathered to create something that feels like a big block, and I'm just carrying it around. So just start with the little thing. And it's just a reminder, start with the little thing, start with the easy thing. Don't make it difficult. And maybe removing one or two of those small pebbles actually then encourages other people to do the same thing. And then you create momentum. And often this is where the team can help themselves. This is where trust in their own agency is.
Yeah, I really like that, Susan, because especially in self-organized team where the challenge is that is too nice, people would not even admit moose heads there. So that's perfect.
It's coming from a lived experience for me, for sure.
Yeah.
I was in a very nice company and nobody wanted to give anybody feedback because I might hurt their feelings.
Any other reflections, questions? What else came up in your conversations?
Well, something that came up was, and it relates to what is being said, is that, you know, yeah, you can be in a nice environment, and bringing up a conflict is a risk, right? As you said, it's difficult, and it has to be difficult in some way. That's okay, but not saying anything is another risk, and so you know, it's when one risk becomes bigger than the other, and when the risk of not saying anything becomes too big, then the conflict erupts. But often we just let it wait as long as possible, and then conflict can be very violent then. So yeah, to recognize that there is not saying anything is also doing something in some way, and it is also a risk. The other thing that we talked about was that, you know, as you bring up conflict or issues that probably are going to be close, like, you know, maybe personally very close to your own, you know, psychology or limitations or whatever. Sometimes it comes out the wrong way, right? People can be blurting, saying things that are offending other people, and but I think it's okay. You have to be able to accept that, yeah, you might be a little offended, and you're gonna have to, you know, deal with that, you know, of course. But just because someone says something offensive doesn't mean that they don't have a point. And you need to dig deeper and you know, resolve the package issue to get to the deeper issue.
Yeah,
Yes.
I really like that.
It's like giving up this notion of us being rational professionals at work. That doesn't work in new ways of working. We're human beings, and sometimes we are 5 and 3. So we have to give that up. So
Sure. Take down the mask.
Yeah.
I also think like a key distinction for me is like, as long as my intention when I say something to the best of my ability is not coming from to be right, you know, if my intention is to, you know, to contribute to our climate and to be a co-producer of the kind of climate that we want, I can't go wrong really. Like I might mess up, but we can clean that up. But, you know, whenever I come from, I'm right, and this is the truth, you know, that's usually when we get into trouble. And you can, you know, we can help each other if we can hear that that's happening. Now it's, you know, now it seems like we've ended up in like a ping pong battle of right and wrong. That's another dynamic that often happens under the surface in groups, like right versus wrong, good versus bad. And it's, you know, it's just a paradigm. It's a way of seeing things. So it's possible to choose another way of seeing things also. There was another question before that's gone now. Someone else had their hand up. Was it Marty, I think?
Yeah, I did have a question, but it's a bit practical, I guess. In the last couple of years, I've been able to practice conflicts, like addressing conflict at work. But it's been very remote, which has been great for me because in person, like conflict for me is like I'm like shaking and like I can barely speak. So it's been really a great opportunity to practice that. And I'm wondering, because you've been doing this for a while, like have you seen a shift? Are people having different types of conflicts? Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Do the skills translate back and forth between the online and the real world? Yeah, I'm just curious to hear what your take on it is.
I don't think I've seen a big improvement yet. It's still handled with when the problem is too big to neglect, when people leave and so on often, or so I really would like us to shift our relationship to conflicts, all of us, so we can become better and develop, because it's a great development tool for human beings.
I think just to add to that, something that I noticed the last time we gathered together in TUF in August is that I think we're developing our ability to be with conflicts more and purples and tensions and so on. And the thing that I notice compared to when I'm in other groups, sometimes that aren't as practiced yet, and it's not like we're perfect or anything, like we're also on a journey with it, but for me, it's so remarkable how de-dramatized it becomes. So someone can say something like, you know, I really don't like how we're talking about this now. I feel like this is really, and people don't defend or argue. They go, okay, great, say something about that. You know, what do you think? And then, you know, or people will say, hey, I don't feel listened to. And then we'll stop and slow down and be like, okay, yeah, let's pause a moment and like, you know, do you feel heard now? You know, so it's sort of amazing for me to watch that. It doesn't have to be drama when attention does come up. It's like, okay, here's attention. Yeah, a bit like mindfulness, you know, when you just notice thoughts without judgment or needing to do anything with them, being like, a thought. So that's something I notice.
Yeah, it could even be like we have this moose head that we agree and acknowledge, all of us, but we say we don't have time for it because we have really business to tend to. Can we postpone it, sort of, or adjourn? Yeah, do it later, and that's okay because it's acknowledged. It's not under the surface anymore. Yeah, Ricky, you had a question, Ricky.
Actually, I just wanted to comment on something that you said about, like, you know, people leaving. And I found like a lot of the time like, you know, we avoid conflict because we have that fear that it's going to rupture a relationship in some way, or it's going to end a relationship in some way. And I was like, it's something we were discussing in the breakout, was like this, this kind of this idea that I have, which is like, you know, if you bring up a conflict and it's coming from like a place of curiosity and like a place of wanting to, like, you know, make things better, it's coming from a good place, and in the end that actually like causes a relationship to end, then maybe that actually wasn't a relationship worth having. And so like holding that frame just allows you to like kind of mitigate that fear of wanting to go into the conflict in the first place. Okay. That's something I wanted to address.
Yeah, something that kind of popped up for me when you were saying that is like seeing tensions or pebbles as like they're just ingredients that go into a pot. There's this book called Things They Should Have Taught Us at School, or something. I forget the name exactly, by Alice Sheldon. It's about nonviolent communication. But she has this nice image of like, you know, usually we go from like a problem and we try and go straight to a solution. And her invitation is, you know, if we kind of take a detour and have this melting pot, if we can add into that pot, you know, our different needs and fears and interpretations and values and whatever, if we take some time to explore those, then we're going to get to a much richer solution, which for me is a challenge because I always think that I need to solve things by myself. You know, well, that's just me and it's not important or valuable if I bring that up now. That maybe is just me taking that personally or being, you know, having my own shit or whatever. But I'm learning bit by bit, if I can have the courage to say that thing, often that small thing that I say, you know, that adds something. That's an ingredient that goes into that pot and makes our solution or, you know, our climate richer. And usually when I say something, at least one other person is like, yeah, I also feel that. Or at the very least, you know, thank you for saying that. It's really helpful that we know that about you. That helps us, you know, be good colleagues and partners to you. So that for me has been an interesting development, like daring to see it as data. Like every time there's a pebble or a tension, it's like it's more data for the group to process in order to. Now I'm going with like a machine-based metaphor, which is not as nice as the cooking pot one, but you know what I mean. I'm just doing a time check. Mel, do we have until the top of the hour, or is it nice to kind of? I'm wondering if it's a good moment to sort of wrap up and.
Yeah, it might be good to wrap up if you're feeling ready.
Yeah. So I thought like an invitation to sort of wrap up is to do a bit of a chatterful. I don't know if anyone's done these before, but I really like this as like a way to kind of quickly harvest some thoughts in a group. So the idea is that I'll give you like a little prompt, and then you start typing a sentence in the chat, but you don't hit enter yet. And then I'll count down from 3 when everyone's ready. So if you can give me a thumbs up when you've finished typing, and when everyone's ready, or when there's at least a kind of tipping point, I'll say 3, 2, 1, enter, and then everyone hits enter at the same time. And then we get a kind of waterfall in the chat. So the prompt, thanks, Bernadette, is, let's see, what is one takeaway I'm leaving with today? Just keep it simple. What is one takeaway I'm leaving, or maybe a better way, a takeaway I'm leaving with is. So start typing, whatever comes to mind, you know, choose one thing. It doesn't have to be profound or an essay, but just choose one thing and start typing. And when you finish typing, don't hit enter yet. Just give me a thumbs up, and then I'll give us a countdown. So seeing some thumbs. I start to become really self-conscious about how I do thumbs up in these moments. Like Okay, I think we've reached a tipping point. So 3, 2, 1, hit enter. And then I'll just be silent for a few moments for us to scroll through and take in some of these takeaways. I usually find there's some real gold in what people share. Maybe I'll read some out for the purposes of the recording. So just at random. Conflict is the key to trust. Like that. Instead of jumping to the conclusion, boil the feelings and beliefs. Like that. Practice with pebbles. Conflict resolution is a choice. Solving conflict can be fun. Nice. Maybe let's do one more chatable. Something I am going to try after today is so again, start typing something and give me a thumbs up when oh, we've got some water falling, got some leaks. Okay, yeah, feel free to just hit enter when you're ready then. We've got a trickle of a waterfall already. Anything left in the sieve? Bringing up a pebble with someone. Talking about climate instead of culture. Yeah, a good distinction I heard is that climate is more local. Because a climate can be, if it's more than 2 people, there's a climate. And it can change in an instant also. That's the other difference with climate. Sit with the conflict. Notice when my body temperature changes and heat rises, speak to that. Yeah, that's something I want to explore and learn more about. I was saying to Anna before is like the embodied and somatic aspect of conflict and what we do with that. So yeah, let's wrap up there. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your engagement and questions and reflections. I hope that was useful. Thanks so much to Mel and Anna for helping us with the hosting and tech stuff. And I hope to see you in some of the other sessions or in the Gather Town space or somewhere else. So yeah, this is a fantastic event. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karin and Lisa. That was amazing. Such a great and juicy topic for sure. For folks that aren't sleepy and have a day ahead of them, the Gather Town is open. So absolutely jump across on there. Also, the sign-up sheets for the community stage sessions are open. So you can go check them out. I think they actually might have some additions in them already. So if you've got something you're thinking to share in a couple of days, go for it. But thank you all for being a super engaged, super wise audience today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.